The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Kate Middleton stood at the tall windows of her private sitting room. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the morning tea that had long since grown cold. The newspapers scattered across the mahogany table behind her told a story she wished had never been written. Headlines screaming accusations and speculation that cut through her heart like shards of glass. For weeks, whispers had been circulating through the corridors of the palace, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. The royal household staff, usually warm and respectful, now avoided direct eye contact. Something was terribly wrong, and Kate could feel the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak she couldn't remove. The door to her sitting room opened with a soft creak, and she turned to see Charles entering, his face grave and lined with exhaustion. Behind him followed Camilla, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sharp and calculating. Kate's stomach dropped as she recognized the formality in their approach. This wasn't a casual visit from her father-in-law and stepmother-in-law. This was something far more serious. "Kate, please sit down," Charles said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, but also something that sounded almost like regret. "We need to discuss some rather serious matters that have come to our attention." Kate remained standing, her back straight despite the trembling in her knees. "I prefer to stand, thank you," she replied, her voice steady though her heart was racing. She had learned long ago that in moments of crisis, posture could convey strength even when she felt anything but strong. Camilla moved to stand beside one of the ornate chairs, her fingers drumming silently against the upholstered arm. There was something predatory in her stance, like a cat that had cornered its prey. Kate had always sensed an underlying tension in her relationship with Camilla, but today it felt different. Today it felt dangerous. "There have been allegations," Charles began, his words careful and measured, "regarding your conduct and certain financial irregularities associated with your charitable work." He paused, watching Kate's face for any reaction. "The accusations suggest that funds from the Children's Foundation have been misappropriated for personal use." Kate felt the blood drain from her face. The Children's Foundation had been her passion project for years, something she had poured her heart and soul into. The idea that anyone would suggest she had stolen from vulnerable children was beyond comprehension. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I would never. The foundation means everything to me. Those children." "Nevertheless," Camilla interjected smoothly, her voice like silk over steel, "the evidence appears quite compelling. Bank records, receipts, email correspondence. It paints a rather damning picture of systematic theft over the course of several months." Kate's legs finally gave way, and she sank into the nearest chair. The room seemed to spin around her as the implications of what they were saying began to sink in. Someone was trying to destroy her reputation, to paint her as a thief and a fraud. But who would do such a thing? And why? "I need to see these documents," Kate said, her voice stronger now despite the tears that threatened to spill over. "If someone is making these accusations, I have the right to examine the evidence." Charles exchanged a meaningful glance with Camilla before reaching into his jacket and withdrawing a thick manila folder. He placed it on the table between them with the gravity of someone laying down a death sentence. Kate's hands shook as she opened the folder and began to examine its contents. Bank statements showing transfers she had never authorized, receipts bearing what appeared to be her signature for expensive personal items, email chains discussing the diversion of funds. The evidence was damning, but it was also impossible. She had never written these emails, never authorized these transfers, never signed these receipts. "This is all fabricated," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "Someone has forged these documents. The signatures aren't even mine if you look closely. The email accounts aren't ones I use. This is a setup." Camilla moved closer, her eyes never leaving Kate's face. "My dear, I understand this must be difficult to accept, but denial will only make things worse." The investigating committee has been quite thorough in their examination of the evidence. What investigating committee? Kate demanded, looking between Charles and Camilla with growing alarm. When was this committee formed? Who authorized it? Why wasn't I informed? The committee was formed 3 weeks ago, Charles replied, his tone becoming more formal and distant. Given the serious nature of the allegations, it was deemed necessary to conduct a preliminary investigation before involving you directly. Kate felt a chill run through her as the pieces began to fall into place. 3 weeks ago, she had been away on a private visit to her parents, taking some much-needed time to recover from what had been an exhausting series of royal engagements. She had left the Foundation's day-to-day operations in the hands of her trusted staff, never imagining that her absence would provide an opportunity for someone to orchestrate her downfall. "Who is on this committee?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Lord Pemberton chairs the committee," Camilla answered, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "along with Lady Thornfield and Sir Marcus Whitmore, all individuals of impeccable reputation and integrity." Kate's heart sank further. Lord Pemberton was known to be a close ally of Camilla's, someone who had openly questioned Kate's suitability for royal life on several occasions. Lady Thornfield was cut from the same cloth, a traditionalist who believed that Kate's middle-class background made her fundamentally unsuitable for her role. Sir Marcus Whitmore was perhaps the worst of all, a man who had made no secret of his belief that the monarchy needed to return to more traditional values and bloodlines. "This committee is biased against me from the start," Kate protested, standing up so quickly that her chair nearly toppled over. "These people have never supported my marriage to William or my role in the royal family. They've been looking for an excuse to discredit me, and now they think they've found one." "That's a very serious accusation, Kate," Charles said, his voice carrying a warning tone. "These are respected members of the nobility who have served the crown faithfully for decades." "Respected by whom?" Kate shot back, her composure finally cracking. "By people who think I'm not good enough because I didn't grow up in a castle. By people who believe that royal blood can only come from certain families." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Camilla's smile had disappeared entirely, replaced by a cold, hard stare that made Kate feel like prey being sized up by a predator. Charles looked torn between his role as king and his personal feelings, the weight of the crown clearly heavy on his shoulders. "The committee has recommended that you step back from all royal duties pending the completion of their investigation," Charles continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Additionally, you will need to suspend all activities related to the Children's Foundation until this matter is resolved." Kate felt as though the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Her royal duties were more than just obligations. They were her life's work, her way of making a meaningful contribution to the world. The Children's Foundation was her heart and soul, the place where she felt she could make the most difference. To have both taken away from her based on fabricated evidence was devastating beyond words. "You're destroying my life based on forged documents," she said, her voice breaking. "You're punishing me for crimes I didn't commit based on the word of people who have never wanted me in this family. If you're innocent, the truth will come out," Camilla said smoothly. But there was something in her tone that suggested she already knew what the outcome would be. "In the meantime, it's important that the royal family maintain its integrity and reputation." Kate stared at Camilla, really seeing her for the first time. The careful makeup couldn't hide the satisfaction in her eyes, the subtle triumph in her posture. This wasn't about justice or integrity. This was about power, about removing someone who didn't fit into Camilla's vision of what the royal family should be. "William," Kate whispered, suddenly, realizing that her husband was conspicuously absent from this conversation. "Where is William? Does he know about this?" Charles and Camilla exchanged another glance, and Kate's blood ran cold. "William is aware of the situation," Charles said carefully. "He's been briefed on the committee's findings." "Where is he?" Kate demanded, her voice rising. "Why isn't he here? Why isn't he defending me?" "William is fulfilling his royal duties," Camilla answered, her tone suggesting that Kate should understand the implications of that statement. He understands that the integrity of the crown must come before personal relationships. The words hit Kate like physical blows. Her husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, who had stood by her side through every challenge they had faced, was nowhere to be found when she needed him most. Either he believed these fabricated accusations, or he was too much of a coward to stand up for her against the forces that were trying to destroy her. "I want to see him," Kate said firmly. "I want to hear from William himself what he believes about these accusations." "That can be arranged," Charles replied, though his tone suggested it wouldn't be the reunion Kate was hoping for. "But first, there are some practical matters we need to address." Kate braced herself for whatever new humiliation was about to be heaped upon her. The morning had already brought more devastation than she had thought possible, but she could see in their faces that they weren't finished with her yet. "Your access to royal residences will need to be restricted," Camilla said, consulting a document she had pulled from her handbag. "You'll be able to remain in your private quarters here at Windsor, but access to staterooms and official areas will be suspended." Kate felt another piece of her life being stripped away. The royal residences weren't just buildings to her. They were her home, places where she had celebrated milestones and created memories with her children. To be treated like a prisoner in her own home was humiliating beyond measure. "What about my children?" Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "George, Charlotte, and Louis, they don't understand any of this. How do we explain to them why their mother is suddenly being treated like a criminal?" For the first time since entering the room, Charles looked genuinely pained. His grandchildren meant the world to him, and Kate could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. But when he spoke, his words offered little comfort. "The children will be cared for," he said simply. "They'll continue their education, and their royal training is planned. We'll explain the situation to them in age-appropriate terms." Kate realized with growing horror that they were planning to separate her from her children, at least partially. George, Charlotte, and Louis would be told some sanitized version of events that painted their mother as someone who had made serious mistakes. They would grow up questioning whether their mother was truly the person they thought she was. "You can't take my children away from me," Kate said, her voice filled with a desperation that surprised even her. "Whatever you think I've done, they're innocent. They need their mother." "No one is talking about taking your children away," Charles assured her, but his words rang hollow. "However, it's important that they understand the gravity of the situation and the importance of maintaining proper royal behavior." Kate understood the subtext perfectly. Her children would be used as leverage against her, their love and respect held hostage to ensure her compliance with whatever demands were made of her. If she fought back too hard, if she refused to accept the narrative that was being constructed around her, her relationship with her children would be another casualty. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Kate looked around at the elegant furnishings, the priceless artwork, the symbols of wealth and power that surrounded her. All of it felt like a prison now, beautiful bars that kept her trapped in a life that no longer belonged to her. "I need time to process this," Kate said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos raging inside her. "I need to speak with my lawyer, examine these documents more carefully, and prepare my defense." "Of course," Charles replied, though there was something in his tone that suggested her time for preparation would be limited. "We understand this is overwhelming. Take whatever time you need, within reason." Camilla gathered her things with the efficient movements of someone who had accomplished exactly what she had set out to do. "We'll leave you to consider your options, Kate. But please remember that cooperation will be looked upon more favorably than resistance." After they left, Kate remained sitting in her chair, staring at the folder of fabricated evidence that lay open before her. The silence of the room was deafening, broken only by her own ragged breathing as the full weight of her situation began to settle in. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy her reputation and remove her from the royal family. The evidence was sophisticated enough to fool a committee of supposedly intelligent people, which meant whoever was behind this had significant resources and planning capability. The timing, coinciding with her absence from London, suggested inside knowledge of her schedule and movements. Kate picked up one of the forged bank statements and examined it more closely. The paper quality was correct, the formatting matched legitimate documents she had seen before, and even the bank security features appeared authentic. But the account numbers were wrong, subtly different from her actual accounts in ways that only she would notice. The email evidence was similarly sophisticated. Someone had created fake email accounts using variations of her actual email addresses, accounts that would appear legitimate to anyone who didn't know her communication patterns intimately. The language in the emails was close to her writing style, but not quite perfect, missing the particular phrases and expressions she commonly used. As she continued to examine the evidence, Kate began to form a picture of the kind of operation that would be required to pull off such an elaborate fraud. This wasn't the work of a single individual with a grudge. This required technical expertise, financial resources, and access to sensitive information about her personal and professional life. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. The only people who would have access to all of this information were those within the royal household itself. Someone she trusted, someone who had been close to her for months or even years, had been systematically gathering intelligence and preparing for this moment. Kate's mind raced through the possibilities. Her personal staff had access to her schedule and email accounts. Members of the royal household had access to financial information about her charitable work. People within the palace would know about her relationship dynamics and personal vulnerabilities. But orchestrating something this sophisticated would require more than just access to information. It would require significant influence and resources. Someone with the power to ensure that the right people saw the fabricated evidence at the right time. Someone who could influence the composition of the investigating committee. Someone who could ensure that William was conveniently absent during the confrontation. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in Kate's mind, forming a picture that was both clearer and more terrifying than she had imagined. This wasn't just about removing her from the royal family. This was about reshaping the future of the monarchy itself, eliminating influences that didn't fit with a particular vision of what the royal family should represent. Kate stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she had spent so many happy hours with her children. The beauty of the scene seemed to mock her current situation, a reminder of everything she stood to lose if she couldn't find a way to fight back against the forces arrayed against her. But as she stood there, watching the shadows lengthen across the perfectly manicured lawns, Kate felt something shift inside her. The initial shock and devastation were giving way to something harder and more determined. She had not survived the transition from commoner to royal, had not endured years of scrutiny and criticism, only to be destroyed by lies and fabrications. Whoever was behind this had underestimated her. They saw her as a weak outsider who could be easily discredited and removed. They didn't understand that her outsider status had given her a different kind of strength, a resilience that came from having to prove herself every single day. Kate picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, looking for people she could trust absolutely. The list was shorter than she would have liked, but it wasn't empty. She had allies, people who had seen her work firsthand and knew her character. She had evidence of her own that could contradict the fabrications, records, and communications that her enemies might not know about. Most importantly, she had the truth. And while truth didn't always triumph in the short term, Kate was determined to ensure that it would prevail in this case, no matter what it cost her. The following morning brought no relief from the nightmare that had consumed Kate's life. She had barely slept, her mind racing through possible strategies and scenarios, each one seeming more desperate than the last. The fabricated evidence against her was so sophisticated that she began to question her own memory of events, wondering if somehow she had missed something that could be twisted to support the accusations. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She expected it to be one of her personal staff, but when she opened it, she found William standing in the corridor. Her heart leaped for a moment, hope flooding through her that he had come to tell her he believed in her innocence, that he would stand by her side against whatever forces were trying to destroy their family. But the expression on his face told a different story. William looked haggard, as though he hadn't slept any better than she had, but there was something else in his eyes, something that looked uncomfortably like doubt. "William," she whispered, stepping aside to let him enter. "Thank God you're here. I've been going through the evidence they showed me, and it's all fabricated. Someone is trying to frame me, to destroy everything we've built together." William moved to the center of the room, but didn't embrace her as he normally would. Instead, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a formal pose that created an invisible barrier between them. "Kate, we need to talk," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I've spent the last day reviewing everything with the committee, going through the evidence piece by piece." Kate felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to remain hopeful. "Then, you must have seen that it's all fake. The signatures aren't mine, the email accounts aren't ones I use, the bank transfers were never authorized by me." William was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden below. When he finally spoke, his words cut through her heart like a knife. "The committee's handwriting expert says the signatures are consistent with your writing style, allowing for normal variations. The email accounts were set up using your personal information and security questions only you would know. The bank transfers were made using your authorization codes." "That's impossible," Kate said, her voice rising with desperation. "Someone must have stolen my personal information, hacked my accounts. You know me, William. You know I would never steal from children, never betray the trust that's been placed in me." William turned to face her, and she could see the internal struggle playing out in his features. "I want to believe you, Kate. God knows I want to believe you. But the evidence is overwhelming, and the committee members are people of unquestionable integrity." Kate stared at him in disbelief. "Unquestionable integrity? William, these are people who have been looking for an excuse to get rid of me since the day we got married. Lord Pemberton has never hidden his disapproval of our marriage. Lady Thornfield has made countless public comments about my unsuitability for royal life. And you're going to take their word over mine?" "It's not just their word," William replied, his voice becoming more defensive. "There are bank records, security camera footage of you entering the foundation's offices at unusual hours, electronic key card records showing access to areas where the missing funds were processed." Kate felt the walls closing in around her as William continued to present evidence she had never heard before. Someone had been building a case against her for months, creating a trail of fabricated evidence so comprehensive that even her own husband was beginning to doubt her. "When was this footage taken?" she asked, grasping for any detail that might help her understand what was happening. "I need to see these records, examine the metadata on the digital files." "The committee is still analyzing the technical aspects," William said, but there was something evasive in his tone that made Kate's suspicions flare. "You mean they won't let me see it?" she said, the pieces of the puzzle becoming clearer. "They're presenting you with evidence, but refusing to allow me to examine it properly. Don't you see what's happening here? This is a setup, and they're using your trust in them to manipulate you into believing their lies." William's jaw tightened, and Kate could see that her words were having an effect. But instead of the support she had hoped for, she saw something that looked like anger building in his eyes. "So now you're saying that I'm too stupid to recognize fabricated evidence? That I'm being manipulated by people who have served the crown faithfully for decades?" "That's not what I'm saying," Kate replied quickly, realizing she was losing him. "I'm saying that you love me, and that makes it harder for you to see when people you respect are lying to you. They're counting on your trust in them to overcome your trust in me." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the streets beyond the castle grounds. William stood with his back to her, his shoulders tense with the weight of the decision he was facing. Kate could see the battle raging within him, duty and loyalty warring with love and personal conviction. The committee has made its preliminary ruling, Williams said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. They're recommending that you be stripped of all royal titles pending the outcome of a formal investigation. Kate felt as though she had been physically struck. Her titles weren't just ceremonial honors. They represented her life's work, her commitment to service, her place within the family she had fought so hard to join. "And what do you recommend?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. William turned to face her, and she could see tears in his eyes. "I think you should cooperate fully with the investigation. If you're innocent, as you claim, then the truth will come out. And if the investigation is rigged, if the committee is determined to find me guilty regardless of the evidence, what then, William?" He had no answer for her, and his silence spoke louder than any words could have. Kate realized with growing horror that she was completely alone in this fight. Her husband, the one person who should have been her unwavering advocate, had already begun to believe the lies being told about her. "There's something else," Williams said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The committee is concerned about the impact this situation might have on the children. They're recommending that George, Charlotte, and Louis be removed from your direct care until the investigation is complete." Kate's world exploded into fragments around her. Everything else they had taken from her seemed insignificant compared to the threat of losing her children. "No," she whispered then louder, "no. You cannot take my children away from me. They're everything to me, William. They're the only pure, innocent thing in this whole mess." "It's temporary," William said quickly, but his words provided no comfort. "Just until the investigation is complete and your name is cleared." "If my name is cleared, you mean?" Kate corrected him. "You don't even believe it will be, do you? You've already decided I'm guilty." William's silence was answer enough. Kate sank into the nearest chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The full magnitude of what was happening to her crashed down like an avalanche, burying her beneath its weight. She was being systematically destroyed by people she had trusted, and the one person who should have been fighting for her was instead helping them accomplish their goals. Her reputation, her royal duties, her charitable work, and now her children, everything that gave meaning to her life was being stripped away piece by piece. "I need to call my parents," she said suddenly, grasping for something, anything that might provide support in this nightmare. "They need to know what's happening." "That's not advisable," William replied, and Kate could hear the discomfort in his voice. "The committee feels it would be better to keep this matter within the royal family until the investigation is complete. We don't want to create a media circus that could damage the monarchy's reputation." Kate laughed bitterly. "Of course, we can't have the truth getting out and damaging the monarchy's reputation. Much better to destroy one person quietly than to risk any negative publicity." "Kate, you're not being destroyed. You're being investigated. There's a difference." "Is there?" Kate shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a conviction followed by sentencing. The only thing left is the execution." William flinched at her words, but he didn't contradict them. Kate could see that some part of him recognized the truth in what she was saying, but he was too deeply committed to the process now to back down. "I should go," he said after a long pause. "I have meetings with the committee this afternoon." "Of course you do," Kate replied, making no effort to hide the bitterness in her voice. "More evidence to review, more ways to ensure my guilt is properly established." William paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, Kate thought he might turn around, might finally find the courage to stand up for her. But then he opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone with her despair and growing rage. After he left, Kate sat in the gathering darkness of her room, not bothering to turn on the lights. The shadows seemed appropriate for her mood, matching the darkness that was consuming her life. She thought about the children, probably confused about why their parents were so tense and distant, unaware that their entire world was about to be turned upside down. George, at his tender age, was already beginning to understand his role as future king. Charlotte was developing her own sense of duty and service, inspired by watching her mother's charitable work. Lewis was still young enough to believe that love and family were the most important things in the world. All three of them were about to learn that sometimes those things weren't enough, that power and politics could destroy even the strongest bonds. Kate picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, looking for someone she could call for help. But as she reviewed the list, she realized how isolated she had become within the royal bubble. Most of the people she knew professionally were connected to the royal household in some way, making them potentially compromised. Her old friends from before her marriage had gradually drifted away as her royal duties consumed more of her time. Finally, she found the number she was looking for: her former university roommate, Sarah, who had become a successful investigative journalist. If anyone would be able to see through the fabricated evidence and help her expose the truth, it would be Sarah. But calling her would mean breaking William's directive to keep the matter within the royal family, potentially escalating the situation beyond what she could control. Kate stared at the phone for several minutes, weighing her options. She could continue to cooperate with the investigation, hoping that somehow the truth would emerge despite the obvious bias of the committee. She could accept the loss of her titles, her duties, and possibly even her children, trusting that eventually justice would prevail. Or she could fight back with everything she had, using whatever resources were still available to her to expose the conspiracy that was destroying her life. It would mean going against William's wishes, defying the royal family's desire for discretion, and potentially creating the media circus they were so desperate to avoid. As she sat there in the darkness, Kate made her decision. If they wanted to treat her like a criminal, if they were determined to destroy her reputation and take away everything she cared about, then she would stop acting like a victim and start fighting like someone who had nothing left to lose. She dialed Sarah's number before she could change her mind. The phone rang several times before a familiar voice answered. "Kate? My God, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Kate was surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "The rumors that have been floating around for the past week about financial irregularities at your foundation. I've been trying to get confirmation from palace sources, but everyone's being unusually tight-lipped." Kate's blood ran cold. "What rumors? What have you heard?" "Nothing concrete," Sarah replied quickly, recognizing the panic in Kate's voice. "Just whispers that there might be some kind of investigation." "Kate, what's going on? Are you in trouble?" Kate took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. "Sarah, I need your help. Something terrible is happening, and I don't have anyone else I can trust. Can you come to Windsor?" "Tonight. I'll be there in 2 hours," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Kate, whatever's happening, we'll figure it out together." After hanging up, Kate felt the first glimmer of hope she had experienced since this nightmare began. She wasn't completely alone after all. She had an ally, someone with the skills and connections to help her uncover the truth behind the conspiracy that was destroying her life. But even as hope flickered to life within her, Kate knew that calling Sarah had crossed a line. She had defied William's explicit instructions and potentially set in motion events that could spiral beyond anyone's control. The royal family's desire for discretion was about to collide with her desperate need for justice, and she had no idea what the consequences would be. As she waited for Sarah's arrival, Kate began gathering every document and piece of evidence she could find related to the accusations against her. If she was going to fight back, she needed to be prepared with everything she had. The fabricated evidence against her was sophisticated, but it wasn't perfect. Somewhere in the details, there had to be clues that would lead back to whoever was orchestrating her destruction. The sound of a car approaching broke the evening silence, and Kate moved to the window to see Sarah's familiar vehicle pulling up to the castle's private entrance. Her friend had made good time, which meant she understood the urgency of the situation. As Kate prepared to meet Sarah, she felt a strange mixture of fear and determination coursing through her veins. She was about to embark on a path that would either lead to her vindication or her complete destruction. But after a day of feeling helpless and victimized, the prospect of taking action felt like a lifeline she couldn't afford to ignore. The battle for her life and Her family was about to begin in earnest, and Kate was determined to fight with everything she had. Sarah Matthews arrived at Windsor Castle like a force of nature, her investigative instincts already sharpened by the secrecy surrounding Kate's call. As she was escorted through the private corridors to Kate's quarters, she noted the unusual tension among the staff members she encountered. People who had always been warm and welcoming seemed guarded, their eyes darting away when they thought she wasn't looking. When Kate opened the door to her sitting room, Sarah was shocked by what she saw. Her former roommate, who had always maintained the composed elegance expected of her royal position, looked haggard and desperate. Kate's usually perfect hair was disheveled. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands shook as she gestured for Sarah to enter. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who else to turn to." Sarah pulled Kate into a fierce embrace, feeling how thin and fragile her friend had become. "Tell me everything," she said simply. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Kate laid out the entire situation, showing Sarah the fabricated evidence, explaining the composition of the investigating committee, and revealing William's devastating lack of support. Sarah listened without interruption, her journalistic mind cataloging every detail while her heart broke for her friend's suffering. "This is sophisticated," Sarah said finally, examining the forged bank statements with a professional eye. "Whoever is behind this has serious resources and technical expertise. But they've also made mistakes. Every forger does." "What kind of mistakes?" Kate asked, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in days. Sarah pointed to several details in the documents. "The paper quality is almost perfect, but the watermark is wrong for the dates these statements supposedly represent. The bank changed their watermark design 6 months ago, but these documents use the old design. It's a small detail, but it proves these documents were created recently using outdated templates." Kate felt a surge of vindication. Finally, someone was seeing what she had been trying to tell everyone. "What else?" "The metadata on these digital files will tell us when they were created and what software was used," Sarah continued, pulling out her laptop. "If I can get these files analyzed by a forensic expert, we can probably trace them back to their source." As Sarah worked, Kate found herself sharing details she hadn't even realized she had noticed. The way Camilla had seemed almost pleased during their confrontation. The convenient timing of William's absence during the initial accusations. The fact that all 3 committee members had obvious reasons to want her removed from the royal family. "Kate," Sarah said slowly, looking up from her computer screen, "I think you need to consider the possibility that this goes deeper than just some committee members with a grudge. The level of coordination, the sophistication of the forgeries, the ability to manipulate William's schedule. This suggests someone with significant power and resources within the royal household itself." Kate had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from Sarah made it feel more real and more terrifying. "You think it's Camilla, don't you?" "I think Camilla is certainly involved," Sarah replied carefully. "But she couldn't have orchestrated all of this alone. She would need allies, people in key positions who could help manipulate evidence and control the investigation process." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Kate and Sarah froze, suddenly aware that they were discussing matters that could be considered treason if overheard by the wrong people. "Mrs. Cambridge?" called a voice through the door. "Queen Camilla requests your presence in the blue drawing room immediately." Kate's blood ran cold. Being summoned by Camilla was never a good sign, but the formal tone and immediate time frame suggested that Kate's meeting with Sarah had not gone unnoticed. "I'm coming," Kate called back, then turned to Sarah with panic in her eyes. "They know you're here. If they find out what we've been discussing—" "I'll handle this," Sarah said firmly, quickly packing up her laptop and documents. "I'm going to leave through the garden entrance and get these materials to my forensic contacts immediately. Don't mention that you showed me anything. Just say I came to offer moral support as a friend." Sarah gathered her things and slipped out through the French doors that led to the garden, disappearing into the darkness beyond the carefully manicured grounds. Kate took a moment to compose herself, running her fingers through her hair and trying to erase any evidence of the tears she had shed. The walk to the blue drawing room felt like a march to her execution. Kate's heels clicked against the marble floors with ominous regularity, echoing through corridors that had once felt like home, but now felt like a prison. When she reached the ornate doors of the drawing room, she paused for a moment to gather her courage before entering. Camilla was seated in one of the high-backed chairs near the fireplace, looking every inch the queen. But there was something predatory in her posture, like a spider that had just felt a vibration in its web. Beside her sat Lord Pemberton and Lady Thornfield, their faces wearing expressions of grave disapproval. "Kate, please sit down," Camilla said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of royal command. "We have some rather serious matters to discuss." Kate remained standing, a small act of defiance that did not go unnoticed by the assembled group. "I prefer to stand, thank you." "As you wish," Camilla replied smoothly. "We understand you had a visitor this evening. A journalist, I believe." Kate felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "Sarah Matthews is an old friend from university. She came to offer her support during this difficult time." "How thoughtful of her," Lady Thornfield interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And what form did this support take? Professional advice, perhaps?" "She listened to my concerns and offered friendship," Kate replied carefully. "The same thing any good friend would do." Lord Pemberton leaned forward, his eyes boring into Kate with uncomfortable intensity. "Mrs. Cambridge, we feel it's important to remind you that this investigation involves sensitive matters that affect the reputation of the monarchy. Discussing these matters with outsiders, particularly members of the media, would be most inappropriate." Kate felt the walls closing in around her, but she refused to be intimidated. "I haven't discussed anything inappropriate. I'm simply seeking emotional support from people I trust, which I believe is my right." "Your rights," Camilla said, emphasizing the word as if it were distasteful, "are currently somewhat limited given the serious nature of the allegations against you. We had hoped you would cooperate fully with our investigation without involving outside parties." "I am cooperating," Kate protested. "But cooperation doesn't mean I have to sit silently while my reputation is destroyed based on fabricated evidence." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees at Kate's words. Lord Pemberton and Lady Thornfield exchanged meaningful glances while Camilla's expression became even more cold and calculating. "Fabricated evidence is a very serious accusation," Camilla said slowly. "Are you suggesting that members of this committee have participated in some kind of conspiracy against you?" Kate realized she was walking into a trap, but she had gone too far to back down now. "I'm suggesting that the evidence against me has been manufactured by someone with the resources and access necessary to create convincing forgeries. Whether the committee members are active participants in this conspiracy or simply being manipulated by false information remains to be seen." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Kate could see the fury building in their eyes, but she could also see something that looked like fear. If they were innocent of conspiracy, they would be demanding to examine the evidence more closely. Instead, they seemed more concerned with controlling the narrative and silencing her questions. "Mrs. Cambridge," Lady Thornfield said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled anger, "you seem to be suffering from some kind of paranoid delusion. Perhaps the stress of this situation has affected your judgment more than we realized." Kate felt a chill run down her spine at the implications of Lady Thornfield's words. They were setting the stage to declare her mentally unstable, which would explain away any accusation she might make, while also providing justification for more extreme measures against her. "My judgment is perfectly clear," Kate replied firmly. "Clear enough to recognize a setup when I see one." Camilla stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and threatening. "Kate, I think you're overwrought. Perhaps it would be best if you retired to your quarters for the evening. We can continue this discussion when you've had time to reconsider your position." And if I refuse to reconsider my position, then you'll be making things very difficult for yourself and for your children, Camilla replied, her words carrying an unmistakable threat. Kate felt her composure finally beginning to crack. The mention of her children was the final straw, the one threat she couldn't bear to hear. "Don't you dare use my children as weapons against me," she said, her voice rising. "They're innocent in all of this." "Of course they are," Camilla agreed, her tone deceptively soothing, "which is why it's so important that they be protected from the negative publicity that could result from their mother's difficulties." Kate realized with growing horror that Camilla was outlining a scenario where her children would be completely removed from her care, ostensibly for their own protection. The fabricated evidence of financial crimes would be used to paint her as an unfit mother, someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted with vulnerable young minds. "You've thought this through very carefully, haven't you?" Kate said, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. The timing, the evidence, the committee composition, all of it designed to achieve maximum damage while minimizing your own exposure. "Mrs. Cambridge, I think you should be very careful about the accusations you're making," Lord Pemberton warned. "Slanderous statements about senior members of the royal family could result in very serious consequences, more serious than being framed for theft and having my children taken away." Kate shot back. "What exactly do you plan to do? Have me arrested? Committed to a psychiatric facility? Or will you simply make me disappear quietly?" The three of them exchanged glances that confirmed Kate's worst fears. They had indeed considered various options for dealing with her if she refused to cooperate with their plans. Her defiance had forced them to show their hand earlier than they had planned, but they were clearly prepared for this possibility. "Kate," Camilla said, her voice taking on a tone of false concern, "I can see that this situation has pushed you to the breaking point. Perhaps it would be best if you took some time away from royal duties to focus on your mental health. A private facility where you could receive the care and treatment you obviously need." Kate felt the room spinning around her as the full magnitude of their plan became clear. They intended to have her declared mentally unstable and institutionalized, removing her from public view while they systematically destroyed her reputation and severed her connections to her children and her royal role. "This is madness," Kate whispered, backing toward the door. "You can't just make me disappear because I don't fit your vision of what the royal family should be." "We're not making you disappear," Lady Thornfield said smoothly. "We're ensuring that you receive the help you clearly need while protecting the monarchy from further damage." Kate reached the door and turned the handle, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the room. But as she opened the door, she found two security officers standing in the corridor, their presence making it clear that her freedom of movement was no longer guaranteed. "Mrs. Cambridge," one of the officers said respectfully but firmly, "we've been asked to ensure your safety and well-being. Perhaps it would be best if we escorted you back to your quarters." Kate looked back at Camilla and the committee members, seeing the satisfaction in their eyes at how perfectly their trap was closing around her. Every move she made to defend herself was being twisted into evidence of instability. Every attempt to seek help was being portrayed as inappropriate behavior that justified more restrictions on her freedom. "This isn't over," Kate said, her voice barely audible but filled with determination. "The truth will come out eventually." "Of course it will," Camilla replied, her smile cold and triumphant. "But by then, I'm afraid it will be too late for you." As Kate was escorted back to her quarters by the security officers, she realized that she had vastly underestimated the ruthlessness and sophistication of the forces arrayed against her. This wasn't just about removing her from the royal family. It was about completely destroying her ability to fight back or even tell her story. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Kate clung to one hope. Sarah had escaped with copies of the evidence and was presumably already working to expose the truth. Whether that would be enough to save her remained to be seen, but it was the only chance she had left. Back in her quarters, with security officers stationed outside her door, Kate sat in the darkness and wept uncontrollably for everything she had lost and everything she was about to lose. The fairy tale marriage that had seemed like a dream come true had become a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. But through her tears, Kate made herself a promise. If they were going to destroy her, she wouldn't make it easy for them. She would fight until her last breath, not just for herself, but for her children who deserved to know the truth about their mother. The battle was far from over, even if she was losing every engagement so far. The next morning brought no relief from the suffocating atmosphere that had descended over Kate's life. She woke to find that her internet access had been mysteriously disrupted, and her personal mobile phone was no longer receiving calls. The isolation was complete and deliberate, designed to cut her off from any potential allies who might help her expose the truth. As she sat by her window, watching the morning mist rise from the castle grounds, Kate noticed unusual activity in the gardens below. Workers were setting up barriers and security checkpoints, preparing for what looked like a major event. The sight filled her with dread as she realized that whatever was being planned would likely represent another devastating blow to her already crumbling world. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she opened the door to find William standing in the corridor. But he was not alone. Behind him stood Dr. Harrington, a psychiatrist Kate recognized from royal events, along with 2 additional security personnel she had never seen before. "Kate," William said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine remorse. "We need to talk about your future." Kate stepped back, allowing the group to enter, though every instinct told her to run. The presence of the psychiatrist confirmed her worst fears about what this conversation would entail. "I think I can guess what this is about," Kate said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Camilla has convinced you that I'm mentally unstable, hasn't she?" Dr. Harrington stepped forward, his manner professional, but not unkind. "Mrs. Cambridge, your recent behavior has raised serious concerns among those who care about your welfare. The accusations against your own family members, the paranoid delusions about conspiracy, the emotional outbursts, these are all symptoms that suggest you may be experiencing a psychological crisis." Kate laughed bitterly. "A psychological crisis? Is that what we're calling it when someone refuses to accept false accusations quietly? When someone asks uncomfortable questions about obviously fabricated evidence?" "Kate, please," William said, moving closer but still maintaining a careful distance. "Dr. Harrington is here to help. He's evaluated the situation objectively and believes that you need professional treatment." "Evaluated the situation?" Kate repeated incredulously. "Has he examined the evidence against me? Has he spoken to independent handwriting experts? Has he questioned the timing and methodology of this supposed investigation?" Dr. Harrington consulted a folder he was carrying, his expression grave. "Mrs. Cambridge, my evaluation is based on your behavior patterns over the past several days. The royal household staff has reported increasingly erratic conduct, including conversations with people who aren't there, accusations against family members without basis in fact, and a growing disconnect from reality." Kate felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she realized how thoroughly her enemies had prepared for this moment. Not only had they fabricated evidence of financial crimes, but they had also been building a case for her mental instability, using her desperate attempts to defend herself as proof of psychological breakdown. "People who aren't there?" Kate asked, her mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "Staff members have reported finding you having animated conversations in empty rooms," Dr. Harrington replied, reading from his notes. "You've been heard crying out in the middle of the night, apparently responding to voices that others cannot hear." Kate's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The rooms at Windsor Castle were filled with historical portraits and artifacts that she often spoke to when she was alone, a harmless quirk that had become a coping mechanism during her years of adjustment to royal life. Her late-night tears and occasional outbursts of frustration were being twisted into evidence of auditory hallucinations and mental breakdown. "This is insane," Kate said, looking directly at William. "You know me better than anyone. You know that I talk to the portraits when I'm thinking through problems. You've seen me do it hundreds of times. Are you really going to let them use that against me now?" William's face was a mask of pain and confusion. "Kate, I don't know what to believe anymore. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your behavior has become increasingly erratic. Maybe some professional help would be beneficial." Kate realized with devastating clarity that William was not just failing to support her. He was actively participating in her destruction. Whether through genuine belief in the fabricated evidence or cowardice in the face of family pressure, he had chosen to side with her accusers rather than stand by her side. "Where are my children?" Kate asked suddenly, struck by a terrible thought. "George, Charlotte, and Louis, where are they?" "They're safe," William replied quickly, but his evasive tone told Kate everything she needed to know. "They're not here, are they? You've already moved them somewhere. I can't reach them." Dr. Harrington cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Mrs. Cambridge, your children are being cared for by qualified professionals who can provide them with stability during this difficult time." Kate felt something break inside her chest, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. Her children, the three most important people in her world, had been taken from her while she slept. They were probably confused and frightened, wondering why their mother wasn't there to comfort them. "I want to see them," Kate said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Whatever you think I've done, they're my children. I have the right to see them." "That's not advisable at this time," Dr. Harrington replied. "Contact with children during an acute psychological episode can be traumatic for everyone involved." Kate looked around the room at the men who were systematically destroying her life, and she felt a rage building inside her that dwarfed anything she had experienced before. They had taken her reputation, her royal duties, her freedom of movement, and now her children, all based on lies and fabrications that they knew were false. "This is kidnapping," she said quietly, her voice filled with deadly calm. "You've stolen my children based on fraudulent evidence and false psychiatric evaluations. That's kidnapping, and it's criminal." The security personnel shifted uncomfortably at her words, perhaps recognizing the legal implications of what was being done. Dr. Harrington, however, seemed unperturbed by her accusations. "Mrs. Cambridge, these kinds of paranoid accusations are exactly what we're concerned about. You're seeing criminal conspiracies where there are simply people trying to help you and protect your children." Kate turned to William, making one last desperate appeal to whatever love might still exist between them. "William, please, look at me. Really look at me. Do you honestly believe I'm having a psychological breakdown? Do you truly think I would steal money from children's charities? You know me better than anyone else in the world. Deep down, what does your heart tell you?" For a moment, William's carefully constructed facade cracked, and Kate saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. There was doubt in his eyes, uncertainty about the path he had chosen. But then he glanced at the other men in the room, and the moment passed. "I think you need help, Kate. Professional help that I'm not qualified to provide." Kate felt the last vestiges of hope drain out of her. If she couldn't reach William, if even her husband was beyond persuasion, then she truly was alone against forces far more powerful than herself. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Harrington stepped forward with what he probably thought was a reassuring manner. "We're going to transfer you to a private facility where you can receive the care you need. The Pemberton Institute is one of the finest psychiatric hospitals in the country, with complete discretion and privacy for high-profile patients." Kate almost laughed at the cruel irony of it. The Pemberton Institute was undoubtedly owned or controlled by the same Lord Pemberton who sat on the committee investigating her. They weren't even trying to hide their connections anymore. "And how long will I be receiving this care?" Kate asked. "That depends entirely on your progress," Dr. Harrington replied evasively. "Some patients respond to treatment quickly, while others require extended care. We'll evaluate your condition regularly and adjust your treatment plan accordingly." Kate understood the subtext perfectly. She would remain institutionalized for as long as it served their purposes, possibly forever if she continued to resist their narrative. Once she was locked away in a psychiatric facility, any attempts to tell her story would be dismissed as the ravings of a mentally ill woman. As if summoned by some invisible signal, Camilla appeared in the doorway, her face wearing an expression of perfectly manufactured concern. "Oh, my dear Kate," she said, moving into the room with the grace of a predator approaching wounded prey. "I'm so sorry it's come to this." Kate looked at Camilla and saw the satisfaction lurking behind the mask of sympathy. This was the moment Camilla had been working toward from the beginning, the final elimination of the threat Kate represented to her vision of the royal family's future. "You did this," Kate said quietly, no longer caring about the consequences of her accusations. "You orchestrated all of it. The fabricated evidence, the biased committee, the psychiatric evaluation, all of it was your plan." Camilla's expression didn't change, but there was a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested Kate's words had hit their mark. "My dear, I think these kinds of paranoid delusions are exactly why you need professional help. Dr. Harrington, perhaps it would be best to proceed with the transfer arrangements." Kate realized that this was her last chance to make any kind of meaningful resistance. Once she was taken to the psychiatric facility, her ability to fight back would be completely eliminated. She would become a non-person, someone whose words carried no weight and whose accusations could be easily dismissed. "Before you take me away," Kate said, addressing the room but looking directly at William, "I want you all to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you destroyed an innocent woman based on lies and fabrications. I want you to remember that you separated a mother from her children without justification. And I want you to remember that someday, somehow, the truth will come out." William flinched at her words, and Kate could see that some part of him still recognized the injustice of what was happening. But it wasn't enough to make him act, wasn't enough to make him stand up for what he knew in his heart was right. "The car is ready," one of the security officers announced, and Kate realized that her time had run out. As they began to escort her from the room, Kate caught sight of something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Through the window, she could see a familiar figure moving quickly across the castle grounds, staying in the shadows, but clearly trying to reach the building. Sarah had returned, and she was carrying what looked like a large envelope filled with documents. Kate forced herself to remain calm, not wanting to draw attention to her friend's presence. If Sarah could somehow get the evidence to the right people, if she could expose the conspiracy while Kate was being silenced, then perhaps there was still a chance for justice. "Wait," Kate said suddenly, causing the entire group to halt. "I have one request. My jewelry box in the bedroom. There are some items that belong to my mother. Can I take them with me?" Dr. Harrington looked skeptical, but William nodded his permission. "Of course. We'll have someone pack your personal belongings." Kate shook her head. "No, I want to get them myself. They're very precious to me, and I don't trust anyone else to handle them properly." It was a reasonable request, and after a moment of consultation among the men, they agreed to allow her a few minutes to collect her most important personal items. Kate moved quickly to her bedroom, her mind racing as she formulated a desperate plan. Hidden in her jewelry box was a small recording device she had used for taking notes during charitable meetings. If she could somehow activate it and leave it hidden where Sarah might find it, she could at least leave behind a record of what had happened to her. Working quickly while the others waited in the sitting room, Kate activated the device and began speaking in a low, urgent voice. She outlined everything she had discovered about the conspiracy against her, named the key players, and described the fabricated evidence that had been used to destroy her reputation. She also revealed the location of some legitimate financial records that would contradict the forged documents. When she finished recording, Kate hid the device in a place where Sarah would be likely to look, inside a book about journalism that she had given Kate years earlier as a university graduation present. If Sarah made it to her quarters, she would almost certainly check that book for sentimental reasons. Kate also quickly wrote a note explaining where the recording device was hidden and sealed it inside an envelope addressed to Sarah. She tucked the envelope under her mattress in a spot where housekeeping staff wouldn't normally look, but where a determined searcher would eventually find it. "Mrs. Cambridge," called Dr. Harrington from the other room. "We really do need to proceed with the transfer." Kate took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary, knowing she might never see it again. Then, she gathered a few pieces of her mother's jewelry and returned to the group of men who were waiting to take her away. As they escorted her through the corridors of Windsor Castle, past portraits of monarchs who had ruled for centuries, Kate held her head high despite the tears streaming down her face. She had done everything she could to preserve the truth and give her allies the tools they needed to fight for her vindication. The car that waited outside was unmarked and anonymous, designed to transport her to the psychiatric facility without attracting any unwanted attention. As Kate was helped into the back seat, she caught one final glimpse of the castle that had been her home for so many years. Somewhere in those ancient walls, her children were probably wondering where their mother had gone. Somewhere in the shadows, Sarah was hopefully working to expose the truth. And somewhere in the corridors of power, the people who had orchestrated her destruction were probably congratulating themselves on a job well done. But as the car pulled away from Windsor Castle, carrying Kate toward an uncertain future in the psychiatric facility, she made herself one final promise. No matter how long it took, no matter what they did to her, she would never stop fighting for the truth. She would never stop being a mother to her children, even if she couldn't be with them. And she would never give up hope that justice would eventually prevail. The fairy tale had become a nightmare, but Kate refused to believe it was over. Somewhere beyond the darkness that was consuming her life, there had to be light. And she would keep moving toward that light, no matter how impossible the journey seemed. As the countryside rolled past the car windows, Kate wept uncontrollably for everything she had lost and everything she was about to lose. But through her tears, she also wept for the strength she was discovering within herself, the determination that would carry her through whatever ordeals lay ahead. The battle for her life and her family was far from over. It was just beginning.